Chair, I can confirm that you are now live.
Okay, it is now, I think, 4:08 and we are live.
Yes, you are.
So I'm going to read the acknowledgement that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So I'm going to call a roll call. Elizabeth Yao. No. Can you hear me?
Sorry. To our chair, I can see that Liz is in the meeting, and I'm just seeing if her interpreters are able to connect to see that.
I see one interpreter.
Perhaps we can come back to Liz at the end, Chair.
Okay, Michelle Mahoney.
Here. Hi.
Hi. Rochelle Manet.
Hi, yes, I'm here. It's Manette, but don't worry.
Manette, sorry. I'm sorry.
All
I'm
good.
reading small print. Sorry.
That's okay. All good.
April Adams.
Thank you, Chair, and just received regrets from April just before the meeting.
Okay, Councillor Kathy Deagle Gammon. I see she's here. Okay. Councillor Paul Russell. I see he's here. Jordan Waterbury. Oh, these are regrets received. Councillor Trish Purdy and Kristen Hemming. Okay, so we're going to do the approval of the minutes from the August the 21st, 2023. Are there any changes that we need to make on that? Okay, so I call for a motion to approve the minutes.
I can move the approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Paul.
This is Rochelle. I'll second. We need to second that, right?
Yes, we do. Okay, thank you. So where am I now? Okay. All those in favor say aye or raise your hands. Okay, nobody opposes? Okay. So we're going to do the approval of order of business and approval of additions. So today we'll be receiving a presentation from the Accessibility Directorate given the light nature of today's agenda and the amount of information they are going to be covering and their presentation. I would like to encourage a member of the committee to move the following motion: that the Accessibility Advisory and Committee waive the rules of order of section 41 of the, oh my gosh, I got mixed up here. I'm sorry, people. Accessibility Advisory Committee waive the rules of order of the section 41 in brackets D of Administrative Order 1. This requires a mover and a seconder. Please make sure that you note the name of the members and move to second.
I can move that the Accessibility Advisory Committee waive the rules of order for section 45(1)D of Administrative Order 1, respecting the procedures of council to extend the presentation time for item 7.3.1 from 10 minutes to 20 minutes.
You did so much better than me, Paul.
I might have done it once or twice before.
I can second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so that's that done. Business arriving out of the minutes.
And Chair.
Oh, sorry, did I skip?
Wait, no worries. We just need to have to vote on that motion, and
yes,
then once, yes.
Yeah, sorry. All those in favor say A or raise your hands.
Aye.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I lost it. Just one moment, please. I lost what I was reading. Oh my gosh, I've lost the email. Annie, can you help me out here and I'll try and find it?
Absolutely. To our vice chair, as luck would have it, our chair has also just joined the meeting. So, I will just check in with our chair to see if they are able to take over.
I most definitely am able to take over.
Thank
So here I am. You're off the hook, June.
Thank you.
Thank you for covering for me for the first 15 minutes. Are we underway?
Yeah, so to our chair, we are now looking, we are under the approval of the order of business and we are looking to approve the agenda as amended.
All right. Can I get an order to or a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved, Mr. Chair, by Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I get a seconder for the motion, please?
I will second that.
Thank you, Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no opposed, motion carried. Okay. Let me grab my agenda here. Okay. Order of business and approval of additions. We have seen the order of business, have we?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the order of business has been approved as amended as per the last motion.
All right, thank you. I'm catching up here. So today we will be receiving a presentation from the Accessibility Director. Given the late nature of the agenda and the amount of information they're going to cover, I would encourage a member of the committee to move the following.
Chair,
What?
my apologies. Sorry, the agenda has already been approved with that amendment.
Okay.
So we are now on item 4, business arising out of the minutes.
Thank you very much. This is what happens when you don't take a few minutes to collect yourself. Business arising from the minutes, we have none. Do we have any calls for declaration of conflicts of interest? Hearing none. Consideration of deferred, we have none. Clerk, do we have any correspondence, petitions, or delegations?
Thank you, Chair. There has been no correspondence received for today's agenda items, nor notification of any petition.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Clerk, sorry. Moving on to 7.3, presentations. So yes. Next on our agenda is a presentation from the Accessibility Directorate, Don Stegan, Executive Director of the Accessibility Directorate, will provide opening remarks, and then Laura Beth McPherson, who is the manager, and Matty Adams, Senior Policy Analyst, will provide the presentation. Also joining us today is Amy Middleton, Director of Policy and Standards, and Terry Lynn Almeida, Director of Programs and Services. Thank you all for joining us, and Don, you may begin your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and want to send our appreciation and thanks to the committee for inviting us. Definitely the work that is outlined in Access by Design 2030 and the obligations under the Accessibility Act are significant. And leading this change, we can't do this alone. We do it alongside persons with disabilities and other partners across the province. And one of those most important partners are municipalities. And so we appreciate this opportunity to give you an update. Our colleague, Matty Adams, may not be back in time to provide the update on standards. And so after Laura Beth McPherson provides an overview, I may be providing the standards update and would be pleased to do so. So we'll just monitor and see if Maddie's able to join us. They were in Antigonish today doing a presentation with the Chamber of Commerce, which again is an important partner as we do education and capacity building on accessibility around the province. So if Laura Beth is ready to go and introductions have already been sort of managed by Andrew, we will move on to the presentation. Laura Beth?
Thanks very much, Dawn. And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. Oh, and perfect. Thank you so much for sharing the screen. That was going to be my first question. Beautiful. So as Dawn mentioned, I'm the manager of the Accessibility Directorate. I identify with she, her pronouns, and just thank you so much for having us. And thank you sincerely as well for the time and dedication you're all contributing to making Halifax Regional Municipality barrier-free for persons with disabilities. As a person myself who acquired an invisible disability in my mid-20s, you know, I've faced many challenges in different aspects of my life, and just want to say your work is really appreciated. I'm not alone. Over 30% of Nova Scotians have a disability, and the work that we're all doing together in HRM and across the province to make Nova Scotia accessible is so important. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that today during our presentation, we are aiming to use inclusive and respectful language. We know in this realm of accessibility, equity, diversity, and inclusion that language is so very important and that it's also dynamic. It changes so much over time. So we just want to acknowledge that it is our intent today to use inclusive language that treats people with dignity and respect. Next slide. So today our main focus is to give you all an overview of some key areas of our provincial accessibility work, including some background, grounding, 101 information around our Accessibility Act, highlights around our Accessibility Act review process, an overview of provincial and municipal government roles in advancing our accessibility work. And then later on, we will have an overview by Maddie or Dawn on the status and an update on our provincial accessibility standards. Next slide. So again, just to ground us all, I know a lot of you are familiar with this information, but it's always good to start at the very beginning. When Nova Scotia passed the Accessibility Act in 2017, we were the third province in Canada with accessibility legislation after Ontario and Manitoba. And our Accessibility Act recognizes accessibility as a human right. And as I mentioned, 1 in 3 Nova Scotians aged 15 and older have a disability, and this is the largest percentage in any province of Canada. Our act sets a goal for us provincially to be accessible by the year 2030. And Access by Design 2030 is really our implementation strategy for carrying out the act. It's really our roadmap for how we plan to meet our goals. And there's 6 priority areas in Access by Design to help us do that. Firstly, standard development, which is really key to improving accessibility across the province. Standards are regulations. So we are working toward having all standards developed and enacted by 2030. Standards are meant to prevent and remove barriers in 6 areas: the built environment, education, employment, the delivery of goods and services, public transportation, information and communications. And later on, you will get a more detailed overview and update on this aspect of our work. A really important part of our work in Nova Scotia is around awareness and capacity building. This is our second priority area. Nova Scotians with disabilities have told us that stigma and discrimination are some of the most significant barriers that they face. So building public awareness around accessibility and human rights is really important to support a culture shift, an attitude shift toward being a more accessible province. Our third priority area is collaboration and support. I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, but really we work collaboratively with many different organizations and sectors. We really can't do this work alone. We're all in this together. So at the Accessibility Directorate and across government, we do share a variety of resources and tools and training, and we create partnerships to build our provincial capacity to carry out this work. Next, around compliance and enforcement, the Act includes requirements to monitor and enforce compliance. So at the Accessibility Directorate, we did work collaboratively with those that will be impacted by the standards to develop the compliance and enforcement framework. And the focus of the framework is really on education and awareness at the outset. The last two priority areas, monitoring and evaluation, we do have a goal to evaluate our improvements to accessibility, and government has a commitment to lead by example, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. So that's Access by Design in a short and sweet nutshell. You can find the full framework on our website. And so really the Accessibility Act and Access by Design are our foundational legislation and policies for moving our work forward. The Accessibility Act requires an external review of the Act within 4 years of its coming into force and every 5 years thereafter. So I wanted to give a little bit of an update on our Accessibility Act review process. Katie Albrecht, Dr. Katie Albrecht, a disability scholar and associate professor at St. Francis Xavier University, led the first independent review of the Accessibility Act. The review focused on 3 areas, our accessibility standards, the development of those, and the Accessibility Act itself, and Access by Design 2030 and the progress that we've made. In May of this year, the report on the first independent review was released. And it did note that we have made some progress in Nova Scotia in our accessibility work, but there is still much more to do. Right now, government is carefully reviewing the 48 recommendations, and we will be releasing a public response later this year. It's important to note, as part of the review, almost 800 people with disabilities, community organizations, municipalities, and others were consulted during the review. So we had really good input from across Nova Scotia. Next slide, please. And, Dawn mentioned off the top, the important role that municipalities play in this work. And we just can't stress that enough. It's municipal government, local government, that's where the rubber hits the road, and your leadership to mobilize accessibility has a direct impact on our citizens in Nova Scotia. I'm just going to take you through a little bit around the requirements of municipalities and other prescribed bodies through the Act. So municipalities and villages were prescribed under the Act April 1st of 2021. Through the Act, HRM and all other PPSBs are required to establish an accessibility advisory committee, which is all of you, and develop a multi-year accessibility plan. And there's a few other requirements as well. Plans must be developed in consultation with persons with disabilities. You must also review and update your plan every 3 years, which I know that's what you're all talking about now. Your plans must be publicly posted. Half of your accessibility advisory committee must be persons with disabilities or representatives of disability organizations. And you also must outline progress made removing and preventing barriers and how you will remove and prevent barriers, and the processes in place to assess the impact of accessibility. And then last but not least, for sure, HRM, other municipalities, villages, all other PPSBs need to comply with accessibility standards as they are developed and enacted. So we just wanted to say today, as you all embark on renewing your accessibility strategy, keep in mind the process of renewal is really an opportunity to revisit your priorities, your approach. For example, the size, membership, and activities of this advisory committee are flexible, it's not legislated. And in a moment, I'll give some examples of how the government of Nova Scotia adjusted its approach to its accessibility plan development when it renewed and developed its second plan. Next slide, please. So I would like to take a moment and describe the role of the provincial government around supporting municipalities like HRM and other PPSBs. And then next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the government of Nova Scotia's approach to accessibility. And I know you're going to see some parallels for sure. I mentioned through Access by Design, one of our key priority areas is collaboration and support, and that no one entity can do this work alone. So under this priority area, the provincial government has a commitment to assisting municipalities and other PPSBs in meeting your obligations. Some of the work we do includes hosting webinars and virtual gatherings, providing toolkits and resources to help people and organizations learn about accessibility. Recently, we launched a new Accessibility Foundations training program that would be available to all of you and all HRM staff. It's being rolled out across the province in all sectors. Of course, funding is always important. We provide grants to support capacity building for specific sectors. For example, at the Accessibility Directorate, we partnered with the Association of Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia to fund a capacity building partnership that included hiring a full-time accessibility coordinator to help municipalities build your accessibility capacity. We're also working with other departments to embed accessibility into existing grant programs. And then, of course, we have the business accessibility and community accessibility grant programs administered through Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the government of Nova Scotia. So today we wanted to kind of compare and show you kind of the requirements at a municipal level. And then this is the provincial level. So you can kind of see what's in common and what might be different. The government of Nova Scotia is prescribed in the very same way that HRM is and other PPSBs are. So we as a government have the same legislative obligations. We have to have an accessibility plan, an advisory committee, etc. And through Access by Design, as I said earlier, government of Nova Scotia has made a commitment to lead by example, meaning we've committed to demonstrating leadership and being a model for accessibility through our policies, programs, services, and infrastructure. Our approach to accessibility is much like you at HRM, where it's our organizational and corporate plan. Each department has its own accessibility commitments based on individual department mandates and priorities. But at the same time, while each department carries out its own accessibility priorities aligned with their mandate, there's also an effort to ensure that there's a cross-government corporate-wide effort to move accessibility work forward where all departments have common priorities. So we are trying to approach accessibility as one big organization, which is tough to do. It's a big organization, but then also mobilizing our work at the department level as well. And one of the key pieces of us doing that is having an accessibility interdepartmental committee. So we have 26 departments and agencies represented on this committee. They meet 4 times a year. They're really the bread and butter of our work. It was this group that helped us develop our second accessibility plan. We have an accessibility lead from every department and agency, as I mentioned, and they are really the main communication point. They liaise with policy and planning. They do the reporting. So they're really the accessibility directorate's go-to for moving the work forward. We've also identified cross-cutting departments like the Public Service Commission or Public Works or Digital Services that with their work would support all departments. So we've strategically identified some units in our organization that can help all of us be more accessible. And then departments are held accountable through a corporate accessibility planning and reporting process coordinated through our team at the Directorate. And they share progress reports every year through the Minister Annual Report on Accessibility. Next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned, the government of Nova Scotia just recently renewed and launched its second accessibility plan last December. The second plan builds off its first plan. So government did launch its first accessibility plan in 2018. A lot has changed from the first plan to the second plan. And when we got our interdepartmental committee members together to talk about our second plan, one of our goals was to make sure that every department included commitments in the second plan. And we were able to achieve that goal. So we have 26 departments and agencies represented in our second plan. The other change that we made, again, going back to the renewal being an opportunity to kind of revisit things, we updated the framework of our accessibility plan. In the first plan, we had 5 priority areas. In our new plan, we have 8 priority areas. And what we did was we aligned those priority areas with our standard development areas to make sure that the provincial government was setting its framework up to support entities like municipalities and others to roll out the accessibility standards. So the plan has 47 commitments, 6 government-wide commitments, meaning there were 6 commitments in the plan that every department are carrying out together. We did have a first voice advisory committee to guide the plan's development every step of the way. We did carry out a renewed community engagement process where we heard from a diverse range of Nova Scotians across the province to inform the plan, including government employees with disabilities and others. And the highlights of the plan include embedding accessibility into our policy development and planning, advancing accessibility in housing, schools, and government-owned buildings, removing barriers in our programs and services. For example, we're developing accessible customer service training for Access Nova Scotia staff, just as an example. And also, we now have more departments that have commitments to provide supports to PPSBs, including the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Next slide. So that's a short overview of the kind of comparison between municipal government and provincial government, a little bit of background on our Act and Access by Design. And now I'm going to send it over to Dawn, who is going to give us an overview of our provincial accessibility standards. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Laura Beth. And I guess I'm looking for the chair to do a time check for me. Any sense of how much time we have before our 20 minutes are coming to an end? I'll just start in so good afternoon, everybody, and pleased to give the presentation on our standards. There's 6 areas, and I'll just move us right to slide 11, please. So next slide. So the Accessibility Act identifies 6 areas to address accessibility standards or barriers, and these become the areas of standard development. So the Act has set out a collaborative process to develop standards, and it begins with the Accessibility Advisory Board creating standard development committees that comprise of Nova Scotians with disabilities, impacted sectors, and government departments to develop recommendations for the standard areas. And after the Accessibility Advisory Board submits their recommendations to the Minister of Justice, we at the Accessibility Directorate work collaboratively across government departments to review all the recommendations and develop the draft standard and implementation plan. So recommendations can be accepted in whole or in part or with modification. And the draft standard is posted publicly for Nova Scotians so that they can provide feedback before the standard is finalized and adopted as regulation in government. So I'm actually going to provide an update on these 6 standards close to the end of my slide. So we'll just go on to the next slide, please. One of the first standards that we began work on was built environment, and it means the human-made space in which people live, work, and learn and play, including buildings and rights of way. And also the interesting thing about this standard, or standards in general, is that they will be legal requirements once they are enacted and take effect. So it's really what all organizations must do. Standards will apply to the government of Nova Scotia. They'll apply to prescribed public sector bodies like municipalities and libraries and regional centers of education. And they could also apply to other organizations that will be prescribed under the regulations, like some businesses. And so the Act actually excludes private residences with 3 or fewer dwelling units and so when we talk about the built environment standard, you won't see the application of that standard to units that are 3 or less. And also our work doesn't apply to the federal government infrastructure. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. And so the recommendations from the board were extensive and covered many areas for the built environment. So they came in 2 phases, with the last bunch of recommendations coming in 2021. And 9 departments have been working to review those 134 recommendations in these different theme areas or categories like site selection, exteriors, wayfinding, housing, parks and recreation, emergency systems. So it goes on, but there were multiple areas, and really the plan, the work of government was not only to review those recommendations, but we were to draft the standard and plan for implementation and compliance. I also want to note that the board did not just bring forward recommendations for regulations under our act. They made recommendations for amendments to the building code, the fire safety code. They made recommendations for action and for guidelines. So again, we're looking at all of those pieces. And so I'll just move to the next slide, please. So here's a pie chart, and it sort of describes things in like 3 pieces, but we're being a little sneaky here because there's kind of 5 pieces. So the recommendations that we received from the board and that the government has prepared our work for, that's under review right now, we are proposing that there be 24 regulations under our act, that there be 21 non-enforceable guidelines, that there be 5 actions for government to review existing regulations, policies, and programs. And then there's several accessibility related amendments and additions to the Nova Scotia Building Code and fire safety regulations. So where you see guidelines, think about actions as well. And where you see the building code, think about the fire safety code as well. So this approach taken for our first iteration of the accessibility standard for the built environment is primarily focused on preventing new accessibility barriers in the built environment. And the proposed approach is for the first built environment standard to apply to new construction and major renovation. And so this is similar to approach that's been taken in another jurisdiction, and also a future phase of this work could focus on the removal of accessibility barriers in the built environment. So I'll go to the next slide, please. So this is a lot of words. It's 3 columns, and it describes government, prescribed public sector body, and businesses. So this really kind of illustrates who the standard could apply to in the built environment. And you'll notice that the government of Nova Scotia will have the greatest number of new requirements, followed by prescribed public sector bodies like municipalities, and then businesses. The standard was intentionally drafted this way to give government leading by example and to minimize some of the impact on businesses where appropriate. And so again, 6 of the proposed regulations require plans to be developed that outline the maintenance and procedures for ensuring accessibility. This includes, for example, the development of plans for ensuring accessible entrances remain free of obstruction, plans for maintenance of parking lots, and the Government of Nova Scotia's accessibility plan for accessible outdoor spaces across Nova Scotia. So some of our regulations connect to plans that must be in place. There's several regulations outline the design requirements for new and redeveloped aspects of the built environment, such as parking, pedestrian facilities, recreation facilities, and outdoor spaces. So this includes one regulation that outlines the evaluation criteria for selecting sites for newly constructed infrastructure for government and prescribed public sector bodies. And then finally, one regulation requires that all temporary sidewalks must be made accessible, including sidewalk cafes. So this slide gives you a little bit of a sampling of what to expect with the proposed standard. And we'll go to the next slide. So this is a little bit of a continuation, but just wanted to note that in addition to the standard that will be under the Accessibility Act, as I mentioned before, we have worked with Municipal Affairs and Housing and are proposing several amendments to the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations and the Fire Safety Code regulations. And so that's a very important part of the work going forward. And in general, the changes to the building code will address the increased space requirements for larger mobility devices in buildings, including multi-unit housing, safety concerns in washrooms and entrances and exits in buildings, including multi-unit housing, and more equitable access to components of the building, such as an auditorium seating, safety equipment, and shared kitchens where present. And we'll go to the next slide. And so this is, I guess, the drum roll piece, but after a lot of meetings and effort and the work that came forward from the board, we're pleased to report that the draft built environment standard went out for public review August 31st. So under the Accessibility Act, we're required to make the draft standard publicly available for 60 days for comment. And after feedback is received and any necessary revisions are made, we'll recommend a standard to government for approval as regulation. So this slide illustrates that the deadline is October 30th. There's lots of ways you can submit online, and the link is there. There's an email you can send your questions to and your feedback. You can phone us at the 1-800 number provided. And of course, you can email or phone the directorate and request a meeting. So we'd be pleased to talk to you. And we're at just coming up to the halfway mark of that consultation period. And we'll go to the next slide. So just in summary, we are targeting to enact in early 2024 to enact the Built Environment Accessibility Standard. We want to align that to adoption of the National Building Code, the 2020 National Building Code, and also in light of recommendations that Laura Beth spoke of around the ACT review report, making the proposed standard public for comment soon and moving forward with enactment is very important to our obligations under the Act. So the standard we're proposing will take effect in 2026. So this gives ample time for business, municipalities, and others for education and capacity building. And we'll go on to the next slide. And I'm just going to speak to the 5 other standards very quickly because I know that we're probably a little bit over. But another piece of work that began in 2018, 2019 is our work on the education standard. And the Accessibility Advisory Board has submitted their recommendations to the minister. We've posted those recommendations, and we have begun the work inside of government to review the recommendations and to consider the approach to drafting the standard for education. The next slide. So the board's Employment Standard Development Committee is very active, and they will be posting an opportunity to give feedback on what they refer to as their draft recommendations in November. So stay tuned for learning more about how you can review those draft recommendations, give comments before they're finalized and then submitted to government. And we'll go to the next slide. Goods and Services is just getting going. They had this committee was announced in May. They have their first or their second meeting this week. They've already had an orientation, and they will have a scope specific to customer service delivery for their first piece of work in Goods and Services area. And the next slide. So both with public transportation and the next slide, which is about communications and information, we're at the research phase. We're working to develop the terms of reference, supporting the Accessibility Advisory Board with that work. And the goal is that recruitment for both public transportation and the next slide, please, communications and information will get underway before the end of this calendar year, so late fall, if everything goes well. But definitely public transportation recruitment will begin by late fall. And we'll go to the next slide. And I think that's it for me. And am I passing it back to Laura Beth at this point?
No, but we were just going to give a quick overview of our campaign just to invite everybody to take part in our work and to spread awareness.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a great, and actually Terry Lynn Almeida, who is with us today, has been the lead for this work. And of course, you know, one of the significant barriers persons with disabilities face is stigma and attitudinal barriers. And we need a multi-pronged approach to be part of this culture shift that's happening and this transformation that needs to happen in Nova Scotia. So there's an amazing campaign that's been launched called Access Includes Everyone. We launched it a year ago. We love working with communities and municipalities to build on this campaign. And we have a resource hub at accessible.novascotia.ca where you can use materials, whether they be social media, there's television clips, there's a photography campaign. And so again, be part of helping us increase awareness for accessibility and barriers and human rights. And I guess the last slide. So, and if Maddie was here, they love this slide, and so do we. You know, what happened with Peggy's Cove, and what started out probably not as an accessibility initiative, but became one and is a beacon, not just in Nova Scotia, but across Canada, for how we can approach accessibility in a collaborative way and do so much and be a leader. So thank you very much for today, the opportunity to present today. If there's an opportunity for questions, we'll stay on. And I apologize if we've gone over our time, but there's just so much to share. Thank you.
And thank you, Laura Beth and Dawn, for your presentation. And in her absence, thank you, thank you, Maddie, for your help with this. We do indeed have time for questions. The first person on my speakers list is Rochelle. So you have the floor.
Sure. I have a few questions. I assume we'll do like a go around and then maybe a second go around, and I should save some. Question mark.
And I'll ask my colleagues Amy and Terry Lynn to put their videos on as well. And if Maddie's joined us, they can also. But it's kind of a team effort with the QA period.
Okay.
But knowing people. Cool. Yeah, I'll ask a few in the meantime, I guess. One of the questions is more so around that Foundations accessibility training looked interesting, and I was wondering like who is offering it and how it's accessed and if it costs money and who is meant to access it.
Thank you for that question, and I'll pass that over to either Laura Beth or Terry Lynn.
Go ahead, Terry Lynn.
Thanks, Laura Beth. The Foundations of Accessibility and Disability launched last spring as a pilot project specifically for municipalities and other prescribed public sector body staff or volunteers who were interested in taking the training. And then we also launched a pilot project for Train the Trainers, understanding that we don't have sufficient staff to deliver the training everywhere and want to reduce duplication of resource development in all of those prescribed public sector bodies. So we put the effort into working with an advisory committee to develop the training module and develop the Train the Trainer approach, and also provide support to trainers on an ongoing basis. We have another Train the Trainer scheduled for late November, early December. There's 2 modules that trainers participate in, and we expect another one to be offered in the new year. We would love to be able to offer it open to the public on an ongoing basis, and perhaps that's for next fiscal as we have more trainers trained. But at this time, it's primarily for PPSB so that they can do training within their own organization and community.
Cool, thanks. And then what was the other question? I'll ask one more, and then if we go around, I'll ask the other ones. So yeah, second question is related to like how COVID considerations have been like employed into this whole plan for like a variety of reasons. Like COVID, I don't know, accessibility has really like changed the game a little bit. And yeah, I'm just wondering like how if it's being sort of like, if it's become a part of this in any way.
It sure has, and I see that our colleague Maddie Adams is on now, and Maddie has led some conversations in community and with government on COVID-19 and really kind of the impacts of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities, how government needs, including the directorate, needs to consider that, but also potentially any advancements or improvements around technology and what that means for our work going forward. Maddie, are you able to speak to the work you did there?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. And hi, Rochelle. We monitored the impacts of COVID throughout and through to the sort of official end of the official end of the pandemic, if you will. And we met with disability organizations to better understand the impact on them as organizations and on their clients, being primarily people with disabilities. We had a number of recommendations and lessons learned come out of that work, which we have shared across government. And if it's something you're interested in, I could share that learning with your committee. Certainly, one of the key takeaways was the need for hybrid approaches. Different disability types have different needs. And so going all online is great for some, but not for others. And going all in person is great for some and not for others. So really having that hybrid approach. Yeah, and there were a few other lessons learned as well. The importance of service providers providing safe spaces, access to internet, and so on.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, yes, Rochelle, if we do have other questions, I will return to you after we go through the list. All right, June, do you have any questions?
No, I'm just listening to it and absorbing everything. I didn't realize how much is going on in the background to help accessibility. I'm really impressed.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, there is quite a little bit of work going on, so I am, as chair, I am very pleased. Councillor Jiggle-Gammon, do you have any questions or comments?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I couldn't find my mouse to unmute myself there for a moment. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. At this point, to be honest, I feel like I have more questions, but I think I might want to sit with the information a little bit. This was a lot to take in at one time. When I consider my previous 40 years in working with the disability sector and wondering around the provincial work that is required for a more inclusive society, there's just so much to be done. I'm very curious about the goods and services, about the education, about the employment. Those seem to be a little bit more currently work in progress, more than, finished stuff. You're talking about putting committees together, I think still. Did I catch that right?
Yeah,
It says committee has begun work to develop recommendations and searching out some more people. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's any member of this committee that is really looking towards, there's something in that presentation that is of particular interest to them. How would they go about becoming a member of a committee that their input could be provided?
Yeah, thank you. There's so much that we included in our presentation today. So to summarize built environment or the standards, specifically where there's an opportunity to be part of a standard development committee, there are 2 committees we'll be recruiting for later this fall. That would be public transportation and transportation infrastructure. That's one. The other one would be communications and information. So the other standard development committees, which there's 4, are either in pause because they've completed their work or they're active right now. So there's 2 where there's an opportunity to actually be recruited and to be considered for that committee. The other thing that I'll just mention is, of course, built environment. The proposed standard is out for 30 more days for feedback. And in November, the recommendations for an employment standard will be out for feedback. So those are opportunities for the HRM Accessibility Advisory Committee or for individuals to consider providing feedback on those 2 pieces of work.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question.
Certainly.
So on the October 30th date, where and how was that communicated publicly for persons to be able to participate and give feedback? I apologize. It was something I completely missed, and I try to watch that kind of stuff. I didn't see it. So I'm just wondering where that was out there.
Yeah, Maddie, do you want to speak to the campaign? I believe it involved television, social media, email blitzes, news release, but I'll
Wow.
get to Maddie to provide some more details. But we missed you. So this is good conversation. How did we miss you? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We had a Nova Scotia government news release. So that would be on the Nova Scotia website. And then following the news release, as Dawn mentioned, we emailed a list of hundreds of stakeholders or community contacts, rather, including our prescribed public sector bodies. So it would have included folks, I think, at the municipal level. We've also, it's on the Nova Scotia government's social media. So on Facebook, Twitter, and I believe on X, possibly also. And then we've also done print media in the Chronicle Herald, as well as in the Cape Breton, in a Cape Breton newspaper as well. There's still lots of time, so you haven't missed your chance. You have until October 30th. And if you want to find more information, you can always visit our website, and there's a link you can follow there to get you to the public review site.
Sounds great. Thank you. Not everybody's on social media, and if you don't know to go to our website, you don't know that it's there. So I appreciate that, and I'll share it with my colleagues in the disability community and find out if they've been participating as well. So that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Russell, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. Thank you very much. I'm looking at slide 11 in your standard development slide, and the first item there is the built environment. So we do, of course, a lot of things as far as managing the infrastructure in the built environment. And the built environment that is out there, a lot of it's done by contractors. Some of them don't have the education. A lot of it is managed or overseen by some of the staff of the municipality, or in other cases, other contractors who also might not have the education or might bring their own flavor to it. And I'm just wondering how you manage, how you enforce, how you make sure that people are following up, are building things to the built environment that is the standard that you're trying to adhere to, as opposed to doing what they've always done. Is there enforcement? Is there training? Are there audits?
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that there would be KPIs or anything like that yet. But how do you make sure that people live up to the standards that are out there that you are enforcing?
Yeah, so great question. Wherever possible, we've tried not to duplicate any legislation or any regulation. And so anything with respect to buildings, we've addressed through the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations. Those regulations, when new regs come out, there's a new requirement for there to be training, for you to complete training rather within 18 months of the new regulations coming into effect. So building inspectors will have to be educated on the new code. I'm also working closely with the Nova Scotia Building Code Coordinator, and as he is carrying out education just periodically, we've now started to work together and include accessibility as part of those discussions and part of that training for building officials. So that addresses the pieces within the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations. The pieces within our standard aren't part of the Nova Scotia Building Code, and we have quite a bit of work to do to educate folks about their responsibilities under the built environment standard. And so that is part of what we're proposing. If the standard were to be enacted in 2024, there would be sort of an initial period of education and awareness before we move into compliance and enforcement.
Okay. And so what I'm thinking of might not fit within the building code, and that would be things going along the street. We regularly see pictures of someone who is walking along the street and they've got their guide dog and they've got their cane and they're walking by a pole, and there's a sign mounted about 6 feet up in the pole that would hit them smack dab in the face. We have also seen examples of playgrounds or other structures where it fits some environments, but the standard or the practices regularly change. And I'm wondering if those would be included in the built environment. Once again, things that wouldn't be within the building code.
That's right.
And,
Yeah.
and that's what your standards would include?
Yeah, so the regulations under our act will largely address things like outdoor spaces, anything that would not be within the scope of the building code. So playgrounds, beaches, recreational trails. There also is a proposed regulation about temporary sidewalks and the requirements for all temporary sidewalks to be accessible. We've certainly been made aware of the same issues as you around folks trying to navigate the city in particular, and with all the construction happening and the barriers that are present. So that would be addressed under the built environment accessibility standard regs as well. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell, and thank you, Maddie, for that discussion. Liz, you are next on my list. Do you have any comments or questions?
Well, I just got the paper today about the policy. So it's a lot of information to sift through, but I don't really have any big concerns except for communication. It'd be nice if the English wasn't so dense and there weren't so many big words, or there'd be more interpreters provided for support. But that aside, I think the signage, having big signs that are easy to read, especially when I'm driving, because if there's small print, I really struggle to read it, and it's a lot more straining on the eyes. I think most of it's pretty good, but it'd still be nice if it was a little bigger. Sometimes when I'm driving and I'm looking to check around the corner, I can't really see, so it'd be nice to have a sign that says no right turn, no right on red, if there's a blind corner, because I can't hear if anyone's coming. So I'm constantly inching forward, trying to see if anyone's coming around the corner before I make the right. Another big concern I might have would be parks and trails, I guess. I noticed that some small bridges, footbridges specifically, they don't have any railings. For example, I saw at Crystal Crescent Beach. I went there for the first time in many years. I was walking and I noticed that there weren't a lot there. So I just had to be extra careful that I didn't fall. I counted 10 steps that I had to go up, and I really thought that there should be a railing, and it would be under the, but maybe that's under the province. Or it could be under the municipal and provincial level. I just think we need more things to be renovated and things to change that encourage everything to be more accessible for folks that are deaf and hard of hearing, and for older people as well. You can't forget about them, because I really think it's important to encourage them to socialize for their mental health. And I think there are some good points presented. I think that's pretty good. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I have one more just to add on. When I think we need to have wider trails and paths because it might be harder for people that use wheelchairs to access those. And it's also important for deaf folks to be comfortable walking side by side so that I have easy communication and can make eye contact with one another, because following single file doesn't necessarily work. If people are hearing, they can talk from in front and behind each other, but when you're deaf, you can't. You have to walk side by side in order to communicate. That just came to mind now. I know it's not this specific goal related to policy, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning.
We very much appreciate the feedback and comments. We talked about in the presentation the various policy tools, and the outdoor spaces will be one where it's a regulation that a plan be developed to make the outdoor spaces in the regions of Nova Scotia accessible. And so the feedback that you've provided today will bring those into conversations with the trails community, with those that are leading the outdoors work at the various government departments. So thank you.
Thank you.
There was a very loud and profane argument outside my door, so I wanted that absent from the record. Ms. Mahoney, do you have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Hi, Dawn and Terry Lynn and Maddie and Amy. Hi, everyone. I've been looking at the built environment recommendations, and I actually have a quick question, if that's okay, about them. With signage being between 1350 and 1500 millimeters, is anybody ever going to complain if we have 12 signs at 1200 millimeters? I really don't think so, but that's kind of what I've been doing at King's, is I've been putting signage lower because I think of people who would be reading Braille, and if it's higher, it's gonna, like, I always use myself in these examples. I can't reach up high, so I think nobody's going to complain if it's too low, but people will complain if it's too high, right? And you know, I've said that about doors. You're never going to see somebody complain about a door that's too wide, but by cracky, you'll hear somebody complain about a door that's not wide enough, right? So anyway, no, you guys are doing really, really great work. I'm really, familiar with all of this work today. I was really excited that you guys were coming to our meeting today. I'm actually one of the people that did do the train the trainer foundations, accessibility foundations, and I really want to I guess give this out to my colleagues at King's, and I think I need either a cheering section or maybe a representative from the directorate to help me with it. I don't know. Anyway, but that's nothing to do with this committee. But yeah, no, you guys are doing really, really great work, and I was really excited for your presentation today. Good job.
Sorry, I just have a question relating to King's College.
Yeah.
You mean the one in Halifax or the one in Windsor? Which one?
Okay. So the University of King's College is here in Halifax, and it's King's Edge Hill School, which is in Windsor, and King's University used to be in Windsor, and then there was a fire, and it is now I've only been there since January, but it's now located on the Dalhousie University campus, and we share a lot of our services with Dalhousie. Students can take courses at both Dalhousie and King's. King's is known for the foundation year program, as well as journalism and the Masters of Nonfiction or Masters of Fine Arts program. Yeah, so that's what King's is known for.
Okay, great. Rochelle, let's return to you. Do your questions exist now, or have you
Yes,
been?
a little bit.
answered?
One was already answered, so thank you, Councillor Russell, for that. Yeah. Oh, actually, a question that came up based on something that someone was saying. So I did fill out the survey. It was long, and it was a little like clunky, but I did it around the built environment like standards review. And I haven't like checked this for sure, but I know when things are shared on social media like this, there's often comments on those things on social media where people are like, this is where I put my feedback. And I wonder and was hoping, wanted to know if that feedback was also being taken into consideration, because I think a lot of people will just like comment what they feel on like Facebook or something else on social media and like not actually go to do the survey, but probably within that cluster of comments of varying degrees of thoughtfulness, there's probably some really useful information in there. So I was wondering, yeah, if you're taking feedback that isn't directly from the survey, like if people are calling in and saying something or stuff going like to 311 or yeah, just like other forms of feedback that aren't specifically from the survey itself.
We sure are. And Maddie, go right ahead.
Yeah, that's a really great question. What's happening currently is that Communications Nova Scotia would monitor the post, and unfortunately, a lot of what they do is delete comments that are hurtful, harmful, inappropriate. But at the end of the social media marketing, what we would do is get a report from them on any comments on the proposed standard or the posts that they've shared. And we can consider, that's a great point. We can consider how we factor that into the feedback that Nova Scotians are giving.
Cool. Awesome. Love that. And then did I have another question? I have this whole note sheet and I was also taking notes. And so now I can't remember what are questions. Oh, I was wondering if you could provide a little bit, because I know like we're sort of like, we've already gone through a lot of talking, but a little bit more detail on like the housing component of the plan, like just like a quick overview.
Do you mean of the built environment standard work?
Let me go back into the thing and see what I mean. There was,
While you're looking, I'll just say, so multi-unit housing is covered in the standard, but it would be for multi-unit housing for 2 or more stories and 4 or more units. So that excludes things like duplexes and triplexes. But for large, say, apartment buildings, condo buildings, there are accessibility requirements within the Nova Scotia Building Code as a result of this standard work.
Cool. And so I assume because it's part of the built environment thing, it's not like, it's specifically related to like the physicality of the spaces and not like the price of those spaces or like who can apply and who needs housing and things like that.
Yeah, so the standard doesn't address those bigger issues around affordability and that kind of thing, but our team is working on it. And maybe I'll see if Dawn has anything or if anyone else wants to add, but the standard itself would be about sort of the design requirements. You're right. So the physical layout and design and accessibility in that manner.
Yeah, I don't have the information right at hand, and maybe we can send it the link, but we've been working closely with the Municipal Affairs and Housing on a number of and they've done, I think, a good job so far on creating some funding and grant programs available for landlords, homeowners to make accessibility improvements. And so There's, I think, a series of maybe 4 or 5 programs now that have been either enhanced or been made available. We continue to work with them on their strategy and other documents that we hope will be released soon to sort of show that long-term or multi-year commitment to how accessible, affordable housing will be addressed in Nova Scotia. So I think there's going to be some announcement coming from Municipal Affairs and Housing soon. But definitely we can provide the link to the funding programs that are available to homeowners and renters and landlords.
Cool. Yeah, I would love to read that and see it. And yeah, maybe it's not public yet. Okay, last thing, and then I'll be quiet. And this is more just like sort of coming back to the like COVID considerations. When it comes to sort of like accessible work environments, I've heard of a lot of folks who are like having a difficult time like going to work. Maybe they're sick, maybe they don't want to get sick. And there being a lot of like really specific expectations of when they have to return to work, which is putting like other people at risk. And so I'm just putting it out there that I think like in sort of a larger accessibility standard that like very deeply has to be addressed. Same with like, and I don't know if healthcare is in any way related to this, but like spaces that we go into are creating more disability by like sort of a lack of public safety and like accessibility in that way. And like all these things are so deeply related. So just wanted to put it out there that like that COVID considerations like should be a huge part of all this planning in sort of the long term. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah. No, and if Terry Lynn's still with us, maybe Terry Lynn, if you'd like to comment on the interest in the Act review to ensure that healthcare or health is considered within our work moving forward. But what I also will say that if an element of this, Rochelle, relates to workplace accommodation, definitely there is some excellent educational materials on the Human Rights Commission website that we can provide the link to as well. But Terry Lynn, anything you want to comment there as relates to health?
Thanks, Dawn. And coincidentally, I'm working remotely today because my voice is not quite up to par. I'm feeling something coming on, Rochelle. So I understand what you're saying and appreciate that flexibility at the directorate. The Act review did identify that there were comments around the importance of health as one of the areas that presents barriers for people with disabilities. And of course, despite the focus thankfully the focus of accessibility as and disability, the understanding of a social model rather than the medical model, there is interaction between the medical system, the health system, and people with disabilities. And so health, our perspective has been that health is the barriers that present related to health will be addressed through each of the standard areas. Nonetheless, there was a recommendation in the Act review that government consider how to better address the barriers that relate to health for people with disabilities, such as including health in the Accessibility Act and including health as one of the separate standard areas. Amy could speak perhaps a little more to the work around the other standard areas and how standard development committees are considering the impacts to health as they do their work. I can say that government is carefully reviewing the Act review and will be coming out with a public response this year. And we're looking at how we can better address the impacts to health for people with disabilities.
Thanks, Terry Lynn. The only thing I would add is that the terms of references for the current, new Goods and Services Standard Development Committee that we just caught in time, and the upcoming Standard Development Committees for Transportation and Communications will include asking them to ensure they consider issues related to health, housing, justice, and income, which were all identified in the Act review, as they intersect with their standard area. And I did also, because you specifically mentioned the workplace, wanted to put a plug in for the upcoming consultation on the Standard Development Committee's recommendations for the employment standard, which we expect will be happening later in November, and we'll be sharing all that information out to folks. So if you see the draft recommendations from the SDC and they don't adequately address the issues you raised, you can provide that feedback to them during that time.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this rather deep discussion of the issues. So next on our agenda, we have an update on the 2023 Town Hall planning. So Annie and Melissa will be discussing the memorandum that was circulated, and Annie and Melissa will be available for questions from us committee members. So Annie and or Melissa, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for engaging in the discussion today. Yeah, just going to do a bit of an update on the conversations that Melissa and I have had on the 2023 Town Hall. And starting off with the venue options. So based on the direction from the committee at the July meeting, Melissa and I reached out to the Alderney Landing, to the Zasman Sportsplex, and also reached out to Halifax Public Library staff to potentially explore alternative options for hosting the event this year. And Melissa also reached out to the Nova Scotia Community College Ivany campus because there was an interest on the committee's part of wanting to see if we could host the event over on the Dartmouth side of the harbor this year. And based on the conversations that we had, looking for a combination of accessible venues, rooms with the technical capacity to do hybrid events, which is the in-person and virtual components, as well as the capacity of the amount of people the room can hold, and the dates that were available. Unfortunately, none of the spaces that we reached out to.
I think it's 150 for the waterfront. I think 150 or below for the waterfront campus. Ivany, I mean.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and so in terms of, it was the kind of, do they fit all of the requirements? All of the requirements at once is kind of like what we were searching for. And we concluded based on those conversations that unfortunately that none of the venues that we looked at for this year could do it for the dates required. For a hybrid event. So, but in the beginning of the search, we had also reached out, to the Halifax Public Libraries to see, just as a backup, just in case, can we, put Paul O'Regan Hall on hold? Like, do you have any date availability for those 2 weeks? And we spoke with Mairead Berry over at Halifax Public Libraries, and we were able to put a hold on Paul O'Regan Hall for November 21st. So it is our recommendation that based on the search that we did, and given that the event is going, we're hoping that it'll take place in November, that Paul O'Regan Hall be the venue again for this year. But again, we're looking for that final direction from the committee before, we absolutely confirm that with staff over at Halifax Public Libraries. But currently the room is on hold for us for the date of Tuesday, November 21st, and did a pre-check for the councillors on the committee. It is not supposed to be a council day. So usually for everybody else in the committee, Tuesdays are always council days. So you just when we're planning events, we want to make sure that we're not excluding counselors from being able to participate. So that's the first kind of piece of direction that we're looking for today is, are folks comfortable with proceeding with hosting the event in Paul O'Regan Hall again this year on November 21st. And then the second part that we wanted to chat about today and get some direction on was about the format of the town hall. So, with just the baseline of the event is going to be a hybrid event. We wanted to just kind of do a little bit of a recap of the discussion that happened last year in the town hall planning, kind of how we got to the point that we did for how the event was run and, where we can go with it for this year. So last year we started the process of wanting to look and see if we could engage an external consultant to, do kind of a lot of the planning on the ground for the annual town hall, which also included, asking them to facilitate the event itself and for them to provide a what we heard report on the other end, because a big part of the town hall is to get all of the feedback that was given by members of the public and pass it on to members of the executive standing committee here within the HRM. So last year, we put out a request for proposal to see, if we could get an all-in-one kind of package. We wanted to see if we could get a company that would be able to provide that support for the town hall, as well as provide the live streaming aspect of that. And what we found was that it was over and above the money that was available at that point in time. But moving into, kind of like what the event ended up being, that was a part of the discussion, and members decided, if we can't have an external consultant come in and do all of this facilitation and write the report, then let's move forward with the event that we had last year with an added option for members of the public to provide feedback on what if an accessible future looks like, and asking, what the town hall should look like in the future. And largely the feedback that was received at the 2022 town hall was to explore an alternative venue on the Dartmouth side of the harbor, which is what Melissa and I have undertaken, exploring that, and to have a representative from the province of Nova Scotia present at future events, and for that the event format should largely stay the same. So moving now to the 2023 town hall, current day, the town hall now has a dedicated budget line of $10,000 a year. And that is higher than has ever been had before. And it is a dedicated line that was introduced in the last budget year. So it's there. And so we're kind of looking to see, what can be done with that, like dollar figure, in terms of either proceeding with the same kind of format as last year with getting an external live streaming vendor, which in the past has cost about between $6,000 to $7,000 when all of the T's are crossed, I's are dotted. And yes, we want to see whether the committee would like to proceed with, having a very similar event to last year, or if the committee would like for Melissa and I to engage procurement to see if we should get external services through a consultant to help facilitate. The idea would be that if we look to get a consultant, we will be putting that request out pretty soon after this meeting, with the hopes that they would then come to the October meeting of the committee to, work with you to build out, what the town hall will look like, if it's going to be different than a panel open floor and question and answer. So yeah, that's kind of where we're looking for direction from the committee today to see what you would like us to do in terms of, you know, the procurement side of things, of making the virtual and in-person aspects of it work. And, you know, we are, you know, within that $10,000 like budget range. Melissa and I will move forward between those options. So happy to answer any other like questions or comments that folks have throughout the conversation here. But yeah, would certainly really appreciate the direction on those aspects in order for us to get everything lined up for November. And maybe I'll just ask if Melissa has anything to add here. And yeah, I'll be here to answer questions.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, everyone. No, Annie, I think you covered it well. I think that was the overview of last year's town hall. We're just looking for direction from both of us.
Okay, so let's begin that discussion. June, do you have any comments on what Annie and Melissa have brought forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't in the committee last year, so I have no idea of how it went. So I'm going to just stay back and listen to what everybody else says and vote when we're ready, if that's okay.
Certainly, certainly. Councillor Gammon, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this will be my third town hall as councillor. One of the, I actually think that going out to procurement to get a consultant to help us figure out how do we build on what was successful the last two times would be important. I guess I'm worried if the tech part for live streaming was between $6,000 and $7,000, is $3,000 going to be enough for us to actually go out and find something, especially when you think about adding into that the What We Heard report, writing that up. So I'm a little concerned about if the budget would sustain that ability. The only other thing I would say from the experiences thus far, really making sure that whomever from the HRM departments that are presenting, that they're persons that actually are close to the information that they're presenting, right? Not that they're representing somebody else, because I've found that when members had really good questions, it felt like it wasn't the right person in the room to give them the proper response, right answer. So I think that would be good. There was some recommendations from the group that were at the town hall last year that are now coming into fruition. So I think I remember one of them was a request for the vulnerable persons, a voluntary vulnerable persons registration, and that's now come to fruition. So maybe one of the guests could be Erica Fleck with Community Safety, just to talk about how an idea from the town hall actually came now, has been actioned, right? So, and what that will mean. So maybe asking if she's going to be able to come and represent, and that's a new business unit, Community Safety, since last year. So it'd be really important to have that business unit present. So that's my input thus far. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to address that, Amy, or shall we continue our questions and comments?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm noting that on my end. I think the only outstanding question from my perspective through the chair to the councillor would just be on the venue option of the library on November 21st, if the councillor would be in support of that.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Annie.
Okay, Councillor Russell, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you. I appreciate that you went around and looked for the other venues, and that is always a helpful exercise to, even though you're pretty sure, it's always good to check that. I echo Councillor Daigle Gammon's comments about having someone who's close to the source of information or the authority to be able to enact what is taken away from the conference afterwards. And I do appreciate everything that has been done so far with this conference. I think it's great to be able to get everybody together and make sure that that everything is on track and moving forward. Having this be something that can be used to broaden what we do at HRM to help us mature as an organization, especially in this space, is incredibly helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Liz, do you have any questions or comments?
No, nothing so far. I'm pretty much in agreement with everyone else, their comments, so I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mahoney, do you have anything?
Nothing really at this time. I was on the committee last year, but I wasn't able to attend. I guess, you know, do we have sort of a theme as to what happens at the town hall, or is it just kind of like a session where everybody can come and ask questions? Or, you know, so these are, you know, are we going to be talking about the housing crisis, you know, or anyway, yeah. So just, I guess, do we have some sort of a theme going into the town hall?
Annie, do you want to address that?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair to the committee member, so the theme, I guess, has kind of been accessibility at large, like accessibility in at the municipal level. So what it has looked like in years past is that there would be different business units who are either working on or working directly with policies, programs, or services related to accessibility within the HRM. And they basically come to provide an update on what is happening in their business unit. And so on the theme side of things, that hasn't been what's happened in the past, because each of the business units might not necessarily be able to adhere to a theme. But you know, there was certainly questions on housing last year that weren't necessarily able to be answered by the people in the room, because housing is so much of a provincial jurisdiction than it is a municipal one. However, you know, one of the pieces that was asked last year was to see if somebody from the province could be there and be a part of the panel as well. And I think, you know, perhaps there have been some friends who joined the meeting today that we could, you know, follow up with potentially.
Yeah, oops, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Annie. I was just thinking, oh my goodness, that the key people that were just here from the directorate, they should be at this committee meeting, or they should be at our town hall. Thank you. That was fun. I mean,
okay, great. Thank you. Rochelle, you have the floor for questions or comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, I am pro having it at the library at Town O'Regan Hall, if that's the option that's available. It's like a pretty good space for accessibility. Random note, like, I know that there's like the door that is close to the street, and I'm wondering if that could be a door that is open for like access to the space. I was just finding yesterday, that's where a lot of the parking is. And like, if for folks who can use the stairs but need like less space to move to get to the space, like I think that would be a preferred door. And I'm speaking personally for myself, but I think like I think it's possible that like having that door open. So that's just like a random thought on the location. I just want to like echo what Michelle was saying about like a lot of people asked about the housing crisis last year, and since it's only gotten worse. And so I do think it would be super duper important to have someone there who can speak to it, even if it's not technically like a municipal piece. Like people are coming to these spaces thinking, I need to talk about this thing that's like affecting us in a pretty intensive way. So I feel like having someone there who can speak to that would be very important. Is there another thing I was going to say? I maybe lost it. It was related to something that someone else said. Oh, around the format. What I sort of like took from last year's was that like I think our original format was sort of like, what does excessive, like the two questions that we were meant to ask after the panel. I felt like people were really focused on the first one, and once the second question came up about like what could future town halls look like, I feel like not a ton of people were really that concerned about what future town halls could look like, which to me, I thought like, yeah, it looks pretty good already. People are interested in this format with like the online and then also the in-person like opportunities to speak. So I feel like that format went pretty well. And that, yeah, sort of what Councillor Daigle-Gammon was saying about if our budget allows for this consulting situation and doesn't take away from what we already have going, then like, sure, why not? But if it's not super necessary, it feels like, yeah, do we really need it? Maybe we could like use some extra money to like provide little takeaway snacks instead or something like that. Like maybe that could be a good use for our huge budget. So, you know, especially like food crisis as well. The prices are very high. Sending people home with a snack or groceries or something, I think, is like a high priority for a lot of event planning these days in community spaces. So yeah, that's my piece.
Thank you. And through the chair to the committee member, the piece around the door is certainly something that we can take away and see what that can look like at the event day itself. And on the kind of like dollar figure around you know, an external consultant, you know, recognizing inflation is a thing that exists. Even though, anyways, okay, I won't get into my economic knowledge because it's not it's not there. Okay, so the quote that we received last year on what engaging an external consultant could like what that could look like, and it included live streaming capacity. It was closer to the $10,000 range. I would say that, you know, when it's all said and done, you know, even with like the live streaming vendor costing, you know, potentially between like $6,000 to $7,000, the other budgetary considerations on that front would be making sure that there's ASL interpretation and deaf interpretation present, that there is money allocated to a communications budget, so that that's done internally, but it is still, you know, money is provided to that, as well as, you know, staff engagement and overtime, ensuring that minutes are taken, all of that stuff. So I would say that, you know, if we were to replicate the same format, it would still get to about the $10,000 range. I think the difference would be between us, you know, kind of having like separate costs, or asking for an external consultant to do all of them kind of in one piece. Yes, we would be closer to that $10,000 range, but it would be largely handled by one or two individuals that are not Melissa or myself necessarily. We would be there to guide and continue to liaise and plan. But
sorry to interrupt if I could. In relation to what you had said, sorry, Annie. In regards to the ASL interpreters, we had discussed this before. It's also important that they're in framing that makes it easier for people to see, and so they don't have visually noisy backgrounds. And if we could also provide cart services, that would cover it, I think, for deaf communication.
Absolutely. And I CART was a part of the services for last year, for the last two events as well. And on the framing of the interpreters, my understanding is that it's just a conversation that we'll need to have with whoever is providing the live streaming service to change the placement of the camera so that it's not at the back of the room, but that it is at the front of the room, closer to the interpreters. And you know, at the past few years, everything was at the back of the room, and I believe
Or yeah, I mean, or you could have the interpreter there in person and just signing that way. Because then if you can't move the camera, if they're there in person, then they can move themselves and get it accustomed or situated.
And the interpreters for the past two events were in the room.
Right. And I never even thought of the audience. I mean, yeah, we just want to be able to match the room and the people who's in it. So it's going to be a challenge to match everybody, but I think we can. And we would also probably want to book that now, sooner than later, because right now we're going into the fall and we're already having interpreter number issues. So if we want to make sure we have somebody for November 21st, then we probably want to book that sooner than later. But that's all I have for comment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. And yeah, today, Melissa and I are looking to get that direction, and we're going to be, you know, I think we have consensus from folks that November 21st in the library is a day that everybody's good with. So we're going to start planning for those dates and getting folks lined up. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And then I guess I'll just ask Rochelle if there was any follow-up or anything from earlier.
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Annie and Melissa, for your incredible work on this town hall. It's a gargantuan undertaking, and I thank you both for that. Okay, committee members, I see none. Staff reports, none. And added items, none. Is this still true, Madam Clerk?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we are on to the date of the next meeting, which is October 16th, 2023. I will add off the cuff that it's sad we're talking about October already. July and August kind of flew by, but that's where we are. So October 16th, 2023 is our next meeting. Could I ask for a motion to adjourn?
This is Rochelle. I will motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Rochelle. The meeting is adjourned at 5:51 p.m.
Thank you.
all.
Good to see everyone.